help us form the questions that we then ask focus groups. So it was a great way to use the minds that were already in the work and say, okay, from your expertise, what is the best way to get the most information of what we need? And so it was about 30 people from all walks of the air property field. We had lawyers, like I said, community-based organization. We had researchers, young, more seasoned researchers as well, and asked them several questions. And what they did was give us questions. So it was like a call and response almost of, okay, here's a question that has to do with ethics. Now, how would you form this question? And we were able to narrow it down then to the questions that we then sent out to the focus groups.
Yeah, it was an iteration on trying to figure out how to phrase it, how to structure it, how to make it flow. So this is a product of that first one, but then also the focus groups that followed after that first Delphi.
Mm-hmm. And so then we went into the focus groups, and we had 5 focus groups, including a landowner session. We had a landowner session last February at a meeting that we hosted. And so we had people from, like I said, community and outreach and education focus group, legal professions, so those who are actually practicing in the law, but also might be ahead or in research as well. We had a research one, and like I said, we had landowners to get their perspective as well. Then we kind of went on a tour that we're still on, and we were here last year at the beginning of our study, and we did a little bit of this. We went to SRSA, the Southern Rural Sociology Association, research convenings at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, and then Rural Soc 2. And so again, we've been able to get people in the room that maybe know about heirs property, maybe don't, but still are able to bring in their expertise to say, okay, how does a toolkit look from the top down? So even if you're not a researcher, but I hand you this toolkit, how is it going to relate to you and in your work? Or even if you're just an heirs property owner.
And just one last comment on this. Careful when you ask a group of lawyers, what are you afraid of?
Yeah.
I don't recommend doing that, because they opened up a whole Pandora's box of concerns that I had never thought of before. We couldn't put them all in the toolkit because frankly, some were terrifying, but nevertheless, the law dimension was one that I didn't foresee as much. And a lot of the people who don't do this work full-time or completely obsessed with it, that beginner mindset oftentimes does help gear us in a direction that makes this more accessible. Some of the best feedback we've gotten did come from people who actually didn't even know what heirs property was before the meeting started.
All right, so takeaways. We've already kind of touched on this a little bit, but it really does depend on who you're talking to and who is in the audience to say how they think about ethics and where they would go to if they had an ethical question. We already talked about the Institutional Review Board. So that's where most of the researchers said that they would go, because we have to take classes on it every 3 years. And like I said, you have to, go with them if you're trying to do any type of research. The State Bar for attorneys, again, they have a little bit more skin in the game, because, if they're not found to be ethical, they can lose their license and, all that type of things. And then we do have some professional association standards with educators, but this was all for ethical reasons, right? Nothing necessarily, like Ryan said, for heirs property as it relates to ethical, which has its own little niche, right? And so they also spoke about their personal sense. So whether that was religion, whether that was mom or dad, whether that was going to a coworker, whether that was just like sitting and meditating on it. Each person had their own personal thought. And then engagement in the community and their partners also had a good piece to it. For those people who were really on the ground, their forethought was, again, the people that were the most vulnerable, the people that it was going to affect first. And so it's been, like Ryan said, it's been very interesting, because each person has their own individual thought of what they think is ethical, right? And even if you have a book, sometimes it has to be how like the experiment of how to create a toolkit that will be generalized but also specific enough has been quite hard to do, in all honesty. So other things that we took away is confidentiality. conflict of interest, and representing the individual versus the family. So again, when you're thinking about heirs property, it's co-ownership with other family members. And a lot of times when a person is working with that family, it's very interesting and different if you're doing it with that one person. So if you're like a lawyer and you're representing the person, or are you representing the entire family that co-owns, and how that means ethically as far as who are you trying to protect and who are you sharing information with, right? Because you don't want to share information with the entire family if, in fact, only one person in the family is your actual client. And so we did hear some thoughts about that as well.
I was surprised how many times we received the response, I don't know, I'm probably going to call Robert or Connor, or I'm going to call the policy center. But one that I was surprised to also hear is, oh, I'm going to have to pray on that. Let me get back to you. Like just, I'm going to have to sit with it, work through that for a few days because that one's a little too complex or beyond me. But I was really surprised at how people were able to process different elements of this whole thing. And we're going to throw 10 ideas at y'all, if that's all right. Some of the ones we keep hearing and how to deal with. We got a note taker.
All right. And so then another thing that we found out with researchers is data. And Ryan already pointed on this, is that, in research, data sharing is not something that's new. But when you're thinking about data sharing as it relates to pinpointing individuals' homes or their family land, where do you turn to, and how would you think, ethically, are you okay with doing that? And so that was another thing that we kept on hearing in a lot of research, is how do you share data and not be, not be the no guy, right? Because you don't want to burn any bridges, but you also have to be protective.
And just to add to that really fast, thanks to Alcorn and the Policy Center, I've been able to buy data sets that I know everything about your property. And you're like, oh, wow, he knows the market value. No. I know the square foot of your unfinished basement. I know who owns your tax lien. I know the year you purchased it and for exactly how much. I know where your tax bill gets sent. I know an uncomfortable amount of stuff about every property in the United States. And so when someone says, can I get your data from you? They're essentially asking for every single mortgage file in the country. This isn't just like, oh, it's a name and an address. This is tax parcel IDs, sub IDs. Note to self. Nevertheless, what's also becoming kind of concerning, not kind of concerning, this information is becoming more publicly available through public data portals. Go look up your address in the local tax GIS system and you'd be surprised what you're able to find. You can see in most tax portals now who paid your taxes last year. If, oh, it's through my mortgage company, it'll list that. The square foot of your property, the average value per square foot, all these things are becoming increasingly accessible. Not trying to cause fear, but these are serious ethical issues when someone has that information about you.
And to speak on, it usually takes money, right? So like he knows that because it was you can pay into it. Now, it costs several, $1,000s. It was not a cheap price, but for those who are speculating, who are then going to try to flip a property, it's worth it. And so that's another thing that we have to always be cognizant about. So, our participants that we had in our focus groups, they found that the focus groups were useful. They found that they were thinking things that they didn't realize they were thinking. And they actually liked having a conversation about it because it helped them as they were going to be forming ideas and programs and products when they went back into the field. They reported that they may benefit from ethical discussions, especially if they were able to do so at their own job or something like that. Because again, that's something that is not necessarily done right now. Like I said, you're told to do a training, or you're told to do some type of workshop, but the afterwards of you being at your own job or something like that is not necessarily done. You do the training, you get the certificate, you show that you completed it, and that's about it, right? So again, having this framework to be able to pull from, to use from, even do monthly, quarterly trainings would be useful. Okay, so what we've done in this toolkit, and when we say toolkit, it's actually going to be a piece of paper. It's going to be an actual notebook that we plan on being able to give to people, and so they'll be able to use it in their own settings. We pull from the bioethics framework, and we were able to do this in four different ways of how you can think about ethics and bioethics. And so it is autonomy, non-beneficence, benefits, and justice. And I feel like every time I say those four words, I say it a different way, right? It's depending on where you are, you pronounce it a different way. But that's the four main topics that we're looking at when we look at ethics. Okay, and so autonomy. Anybody know what autonomy? Anybody know what autonomy? When you think of autonomy, do you know what you're thinking about? Do you have an understanding of what autonomy is? What is autonomy to you?
Looking at it hands off. It's my autonomy to myself, to whatever that's there. And you got research and design of that way for family choice.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, family choice. So basically, I can control what happens to me and what happens to me and my family. Anybody else have any thoughts as far as autonomy? Everybody agree with that?
Agency.
Agency, yeah. Agency over the choice to do whatever it is with you. Like you said, your family, your land, who's helping you, who's not helping you, things like that. Yeah.
And it might be easy to just be running and gunning and you're meeting with the family and you're doing all this with landowners and you're like, okay, next step is this, next step is that. But there are moments of, hey, you can take your time, go talk through it with the family, make a decision of X, Y, and Z. But building in that choice and agency actually does take more thought than I think I originally had.
Yeah, one of the things, especially when we're doing our training and we're thinking about the overview, the prevention, and the resolution is when we're training people, we're like, okay, one of the main things that we used to tell people is you need to clear your heirs property. You need to get it into one name. You need to make sure it's not vulnerable anymore. And then we said and thought, we're not giving the families any autonomy to do what they want to do with the land or with the parcel. We're just telling them what we think would be the best for them. And then our gold star kind of shifted to say, okay, yes, clearing the property would make it less vulnerable, but for some families, that's not an option. You have 600 people who are connected to one piece of land. And if y'all, Thanksgiving, I always say Thanksgiving's coming up. How many people are going to argue over what's over the table, on the table? Because I like cabbage and my sister hates cabbage. She likes potato salad, I don't. So guess who's going to argue over, potato salad, cabbage. Now imagine if we had a piece of a property that we all love, that we all fit summers at, that we all still go to now, those arguments are going to be escalated, right? And so again, us coming in and saying, well, this is what you need to do, this is what you have to do to protect your property, that was not giving them any choice. That was not giving them any autonomy.
Individual autonomy is fairly easy to understand. We make our own decisions in our lives. Family autonomy may represent multiple autonomies.
Yes.
Right? And while you say we all love the land, that's not always true.
Mm-hmm.
Because some of those 600 people done moved to Connecticut or Michigan or wherever, never been to that land. Don't have that connection. May have generational differences from those who do, may have different economic needs, maybe actually quite interested in liquidating that process,
definitely,
that property and getting some cash in pocket. So autonomy is a multiple thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a property on the edge of Mississippi here in Alabama that has over 500 co-owners. It was bought in the late 1800s, so it's just multiplied and fractionated like a family tree getting put in a wood chipper. But many of the kids who moved away are now saying, liquidate, I need my intergenerational wealth back. And that's completely understandable. But over 100 of the current heirs still live on the property. So you're talking about not evicting one or two people to liquidate. You're talking about liquidating a whole series of neighborhoods, essentially. It's a pretty complex issue when you realize that everyone's agency is oftentimes pitted against each other.
You guys were talking about ethics in the last slide. I think when it comes to the ethical side of it, that autonomy is like one of the most important things, especially as when it involves a lawyer that being have to deal with the multiplicity of people. You know, there's different, like she said, there's different cultures within the small framework of a family, like from one era, one set of generation to the next. One set of family don't believe that, so the autonomy is very important as it relates to that ethic point of view, because that goes to how, especially how the attorney, because we don't know the particular plaintiff that's coming in for that problem. So in that regard, you have to also be careful, because that person could be only giving their perspective from anger, or giving their perspective from being frustrated, or giving their perspective because this family member didn't care about the land as much as I do, but yet that other family member does have a legal right to it. So that autonomy is a very, very, very funny thing to play with as it relates to bringing that in with ethics when it comes to making a decision for all those families.
Beautifully put.
There's an example I can think of also, different spin. Family, a guy who owns 5